in this part of the tutorial we are going to create the jump animation, because right now we only have a run animation and an idle animation, which means whenever we jump, well, we'll only be able to jump and idle or jump and run. So we'll have to add the jump animation, but we can't just add the jump animation just like that, because we need to split up the jump animation into two parts, so that he jumps up in one part and he lands in the other part, so that he doesn't land mid-air. If we would use the jump animation just like that, like the whole animation, he might land before he hits the ground, which means that he would end up he would end up landing in the air and then falling to the ground, and we don't want that. We want him to land when his feet hit the ground. So to handle this, we'll have to create a double animation for our jump. So go to the sprites, find the character, and then scroll all the way down until you find the jump. And as you can see here, the jump consists of 10 sprites actually. Let's see, 10 sprites here. So the first part of it until 5, I guess. Let's say until 6, from 0 to 6 is the jump up animation. So you can take that and drop it into your scene, and then you delete the jump, and then you delete the controller, and then we can rename the jump to jump up, or take off actually. Take off, not take off, take off. There we go. That's our takeoff. So we add that to animations. Then we go back and find the jump again, and then we take from 7 until 9, I guess. Now let's say, from 7 to 9, and we create our land animation from these 3. So just drag these into the scene, delete the new jump character there, delete the controller, and take the jump, move it to animations. And inside animations, we will rename this to landing. So now we have a takeoff animation and a landing animation, and we'll need to add these two to our animator. But we will not have to do it just like that. We will need to go to our player, select the animator window, and then you'll click on the tab called layers here. Right now there's a base layer tab. We'll have to double click on the base layer name and rename this to ground layer. This is our ground layer. And then we'll have to click the little plus here to add a air layer. So now we'll have a ground layer for controlling every single animation on the ground. And we'll have an air layer for controlling all animations in the air, like jumping attack, jumping and taking off, and landing again, for example. So that's what we'll need in here in the air layer. So we'll have to add the landing and the takeoff. So the takeoff should be the standard animation here. So if we take takeoff and add as default, and we'll also have to add the landing here. So what are layers? Well, layers can be used to set a weight. So at some point when the weight is weighted towards the specific layer, well, then the animations inside the layers will show in the game. For example, if I play the game now, you'll see even though takeoff is played over and over again, well, then the animation is not shown here, because we haven't told the animator that it should use the air layer instead of the ground layer. Because if we jump to the ground layer, you'll see idle is playing and idle is playing here. But what I can do is that I can go to this, select the little gear icon here, and take the weight and move it over. So now it actually plays the jump animation, as you can see, because the weight is weighted towards the air layer. And this is what we have to do from our code. So when we take off by pressing space, then it needs to change the animation or the weight of the layers so that it goes to jump animation, so that our player can jump, show the jump. But we'll have to do this from our code, so just put it back at 0. So the next thing we'll have to do is to make sure that we can transition to the takeoff and then over to the landing, of course. Right now, if you click on your landing, you'll see that loop time is set. We don't need the animation to loop, so we'll have to move loop time, and the same goes for the takeoff here. So go to animations, click on takeoff and remove the loop time as well. Right now when we play the game, it might look a little weird because it keeps looping takeoff here, and that's because that it can transition to itself, and we don't want that. So right now we'll have to take any state here, so we can transition from any state into takeoff. Right click on any state, make transition into takeoff. So when you have selected the player and select your animator, you can see all these things. Okay, so if we click on this little arrow here, you'll see that right now when we play it, it keeps transitioning from itself to itself, or at least it should. So to avoid some confusion later, we'll have to click on any state, click on the little arrow between takeoff and any state, remove fixed duration, remove transition duration, and remove the can transition to, so that it can't transition to itself. So now we have removed can transition to. So right now when we play the game, if it plays, it actually stops looping. If we went to this and set the layer weight, we'll only be in the jump takeoff state here. As you can see, if we start with a high layer weight, it will play the jump and takeoff animation like this, as you can see. Yeah, let's just set the layer weight back to 0. There we go. Then we will need to take from takeoff into landing here. We can do that by right clicking, make transition, click on landing, and then we'll have to add a condition. First of all, we need to remove the exit time, we will need to remove the fixed duration, and we will click on the transition duration and set it to 0. When you've done that, we will need to add a parameter for transitioning to the landing here. So, and we'll also be able to landing here, and we'll also be able to have to set it up here, because we can transition from any state to takeoff, but we don't want to transition from landing into takeoff, so we need to add a parameter that it prevents us from going from landing to takeoff. Yeah. So click on parameters and click on that little plus sign, and then select a, let's just use a trigger here. And this trigger will have to be trigger the landing. So, or actually no, let's not make a trigger, let's make a bool. Click on it and select a bool instead. And then we can call it landing, or land, let's land. So if land is true, we will have to go from takeoff to landing. So click on the transition and find the conditions, and then find land, boom, and set it to true. So if landing is true, then we go to the landing. Next one is down here. If land is false here, boom. If it's false, then we can go to our takeoff here. So right now when we play it, it will start playing it, and if it goes to true, then we'll play the landing, as you can see here. Else false, we go to takeoff. We start falling down, well, then we go to the landing animation instead. But I actually noticed something. If we play this, you'll see that the takeoff animation is played right away. So whenever we start our wait here, well, then our takeoff is played at all times. And we're maybe not interested in that. Maybe we want to wait with playing the takeoff until we want to. So because right now the takeoff animation is never shown, it just ends up in the last part of the animation. So we'll actually have to create a empty state between takeoff and any state. So right click, create state empty, and then we'll have to make any state transition between these two. Or actually maybe we don't even need that. Let's just try without. And then we'll have to click delete takeoff, the two transitions between any state and that. And then we'll have to right click on new state, make transition to takeoff. Then we have to make this transition here, and we'll have to make a new trigger or something called jump. So if we add a new parameter here, click on the plus and make a trigger and call it jump. And then we set the new state as default. So the new state here, just call it default state. is our default state. So if jump is true, then we go to takeoff, and if landing is true, then we start landing. So between these two, we have to remove the exit time. We'll have to remove the fixed duration and 0. And then we'll have to go to the conditions in the arrow between the two of them. Click the plus, click here, click on the jump trigger. So let's see here how it works now. So right now it's just in the default state. If we go to the layers, select this layer as layer weight totally up. Then if we go to the parameters here and we say, well, now we jump, then we go into the jumping animation. And when we're up there, well, then we start saying, well, we need to land again. Then we go to the landing animation. So now we have a transition between the two of them. And to the default state here, we'll also have to do any state, I guess, from any state to default state. Because if I look here, it looks like we are jumping like this. We're jumping, boom. And then we're stuck in takeoff. And then we want to land. So land here, and then we're stuck in landing. And even if I cancel landing, well, then I'm never able to go back to my default state here. So I need to be able to go to default state. So if I right click, make transition to default state, and click on the transition to default state, add the condition here, say that I want to say landing is false, then I can transition to default state from any other state. I'm not even sure if I want that, because then I might go from takeoff to default state. So let's just delete this one. Sorry, I'm just figuring out what to do right now. Let's take from landing, make transition from landing to our default state here. So we can go from default state to takeoff, and from takeoff we can go to landing, and from landing we can go to default state. If we move this transition here, there we go, 0. And then we say the transition between landing and default state, click on the plus, then we can say that land should be false. There we go. So let's try again. We are in default state, we start jumping. There, we play the, sorry, I forgot to put the layer weight on. Let's try again. Boom, we put the layer weight up from our script. Playing the game, we start jumping. Boom, he plays the jump animation. We want to land, so we put land to true. Play the land animation. When we are landed, we move the land. Boom, and we play the default animation again. Okay, so now we have a cycle for jumping, I think. So now that we have set this up, we can actually go to our script and make sure that we actually jump. So open up the script, and in here we'll have to add a new function. Let's go to the bottom here, and we are going to add a function that is called private void handle layers. And if is grounded, so if we are on the ground, or if we aren't on the ground actually, then we say animator, my animator, that's what it's called, my animator dot set layer weight 1 1. So if we're not on the ground, which means that we are in the air, then we say our layer number 1, which is 0, and this is 1. So our air layer, the weight on that air layer should be set to 1, so that we can show the jump animations. So that's exactly what we're doing here. Else we can say my animator dot set layer weight 1 0. So we set the layer weight on that one back to 0, so we show the ground animations again. We need to call handle layer somewhere, and we can do that. Let's say, where do we want to do that? We need to do it when we have already jumped, basically. So we can do it between handle attacks. So handle handle layers right here, and save. So now we at least play the handle, we at least have the handle layers in place. So right now if I play the game, let's see here, if I look at the weight, I don't know if I can see that, I can't see that well, but not right now, it's idling. You can see he's moving. If I jump, he's still idling though, but you can see the layer weight here gets changed. As you can see right here, it's like black, but when I jump, you'll see that it turns blue, as you can see here, because that layer weight is higher than the other one. So it's actually highlighting the current layer here. Okay, so we will also need to set the jump when we press the space button. So let's see here. So in here, I guess we can go to our handle movement, and right here inside our handle movement is grounded and jump. Well, then we can also say that my animator dot set trigger jump. So if we are grounded and we are allowed to jump, well, then we're going to set the trigger jump to true, and we add force so we can jump. So let's try, let's see, jump should be with non-capital J, I think. Let's see what I did here, parameters, yeah, jump without capital J. So let's see if we can go from this to takeoff. Yeah, as you can see, I can go to the takeoff function here, but the trigger is never like set back to 0 here, so I can play the animation one more time next time I play it. So we also need to reset the trigger when I jump here. Let's say that we can, or maybe it's actually done by itself. Let's try this. Go like this, and if I click land, nope. Okay, so we need to reset the trigger inside our function here. We have set trigger, so we can go to the is grounded somewhere. Is grounded here, we return true, and if we are grounded, well, then I guess we can say my animator dot set trigger jump. Can we reset trigger actually? Reset trigger jump. There we go. So that should reset the trigger. Let's try. If we land on the ground at some point again. Jump. Yeah, jump. Yeah, there we go. You can see that trigger is triggered, and when I land, then it's reset by itself here. Okay, so right now we only have a jump animation. We don't have a landing animation, so it doesn't go back to the default state here just by itself like that. So we'll have to trigger the landing as well. So we'll have to set the landing to true. And we can do that from our script as well. So in here, when we land, when we land, we'll have to say my animator dot set bool land false. So when we are landed, we're done landing, so we should just set this one to false. And then we'll have to set it to true somewhere. And the point what we need to set it to true is when we start falling towards the ground again. And we can actually look at the rigid body to check if we are falling. So if we go to handle movement, here, on top here we can make if my rigid body dot velocity dot y is less than 0. So if the velocity is less than 0, well, then we know we're falling towards the ground. So we can say my animator dot set bool land true. So now we should start landing again. Save this and let's see how it works out here. So we are on the ground here. If we jump up and then we jump down, so you can see now it's in default state. If we jump, it takes off, and then it puts the foot out until we are on the ground. Boom. So now we actually have a whole jump animation here. As you can see, boom. And actually it should be able to, I think we should be able to transition from our default state to landing, because when I play the game from the start, he just idles in the air and falls down. So I can basically also make a transition from default to landing, I think, and then add transition as land to true, and then remove the exit time, remove this, and remove the duration. Let's try again. If he falls now, yeah, then he starts to fall right away. Yeah. So now we have a nice jump animation. You can see that he jumps up and then stretches out his leg as he at the top, so that he lands with his one leg first here. So that's how we could actually split up the jump animation here. See, maybe it looks a little jagged, dick, when he's like stretching out his leg. So maybe we can speed it up a little, that animation, so it doesn't look so stupid in like when he jumps up. So we can take the jump animation, take off here. Actually, then here we need to click on the animator, click on take off, then take the speed and make it to 0.5. Then it's half speed now. Maybe it's too fast. Let's try. Let's see what happens. It looks a little better now when he's doing it faster. You can of course make it even faster if you want to. Say 0.25. Just twice as fast again. It looks a little more fluid. I don't know. That's actually slower, isn't it? Yeah. So it needs to go the other way. The speed needs to be higher for him to do it faster. So let's say 1.5. Of course the speed needs to be higher when you need to do it faster. It wouldn't make any sense to take it less. I don't know. Let's try 2. Yeah, that looks maybe a little better. So it's not until he starts landing, goes a little slow. So of course you can also change the landing to be a little faster if we put it at 2 as well. See how fast it goes then. Yeah, that's basically up to you how you want to put it. So yeah, but for now at least he's jumping and he's landing correctly. And now I just attacked in the air, so then he falls, of course, because we need to fix that. Yes, that's it about the jumping and animation. In the next tutorial, I guess we'll try to make him attack in the air. Yes, so let's move on to the attack in the air.